Hi, this is Rod Saunders from Jew and Greek. A few weeks ago, I did a video where I offered my thoughts on the coronavirus. And since then, there have been a few developments, so I thought I'd do a follow-up video. I took a couple of weeks off to make sure I was informed enough about this to do a video without spreading misinformation. Chemistry and biology were my worst subjects when I was a kid, so this doesn't come natural for me. In the process of researching and educating myself, I've become somewhat fixated on the matter. That's just the way my brain works. When I was a kid, my dad said, "That boy's got a one-track mind." You see, in grade school, I was a baseball freak. All I could think about was baseball, watching baseball, practicing baseball, and playing baseball. Willie Mays was my hero, and he played for the San Francisco Giants. Now, since I lived in Texas, their home games were never finished by the time the sports report came on at night, so I had to get up early the next morning and grab the newspaper to see if the Giants won and if Willie Mays hit a home run. That's really how I learned to read. My Little League team won the city championship when I was 11. I played second base, and in Little League, it's almost automatic that you steal second base when you get on first, because Little League catchers can't throw you out. But our catcher was a natural athlete, and he had a great arm. So when he saw the runner going, he would fire the ball down to me, and I'd make the tag. Most of the time, anyway. I remember one game when a little kid was on first, and his coach told him to run to second, so he did. I don't think the kid knew anything about baseball because he wasn't even 10 feet from second base, and I was already standing there with the ball. I figured for sure he would turn around and run back toward first, so I took a couple of steps in that direction, but he didn't stop. I don't think he was even looking at me. He was just running to second like his coach told him to. Well, anyway, he ended up running face first into my glove. His feet shot out in front of him, and he fell flat on his behind and started crying. I felt bad because I didn't mean to hurt the kid. I was just playing the game like I always did. Well, after you throw a runner out in Little League, they quit trying to steal second, and that makes a huge difference in the game because now any ground ball hit to the shortstop or third baseman doesn't require a long throw to first. You can just throw it to second for the force out. That really helps you to keep the other team from scoring. That's why we won so many games. Then in junior high, I quit playing baseball and started playing golf. I grew 6 inches in 1 year, so I was kind of clumsy and wasn't very good at baseball anymore. But with golf, I didn't have to run, catch, or throw. I just swung the club. And I practiced and played constantly. By the time I was 16, I had a 7 handicap and was on the golf team in high school. I played in a lot of tournaments and won a few trophies. But then I started playing the guitar. And at 16, I lost interest in golf and spent all of my time practicing the guitar. It drove Dad up the wall. But my thinking was, how are you going to excel at something without total dedication? Dad called it a one-track mind, but I just thought of it as commitment to my craft. All of that to say this. For the last couple of weeks, I've been going through tons of videos and websites to get up to speed on what's going on. So now I'm going to pass what I've learned along to you. Some of it you probably already know, but some of it you probably don't. So let's get into it. Now, a lot of people say that COVID-19 isn't as deadly as other viruses, and they use this chart to prove it. What they're not telling you is that most of the other viruses were not pandemics. They were either endemics or epidemics. An endemic would be a virus that is fairly localized, which means it's confined to a city or a large metropolitan area. Let's just use the Miami area as an example. An endemic there would probably be found in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, and other cities in that area due to factors that are unique to South Florida. Then an epidemic would be much more widespread. So, continuing with the previous example, we'd expect to see an epidemic spreading from Miami throughout the southern part of the nation, or maybe throughout the entire mainland of the United States. Then there's a pandemic, which spreads across borders to other countries or continents, or as in this case, pretty much the entire planet. Only the most contagious and durable viruses could qualify as pandemics. The thing that makes COVID-19 so deadly isn't its potency, but its highly contagious nature. It spreads like wildfire. It's 3 times as contagious as the flu. So even though the others had a higher fatality rate, the deaths resulting from them were 774 deaths from SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, 858 deaths from MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome, 11,325 deaths from Ebola, and the H1N1 virus, also known as swine flu, which was a true pandemic, killed 284,000 people in 2009, while COVID-19 was expected to kill a lot more than that globally. On March 16th, the Imperial College of London's COVID-19 response team issued a report that said 2.2 million Americans would die from the virus if no mitigating action was taken. That's when President Trump took the initiative in shutting down the country and encouraging social distancing. Take a look at this chart. You can see from the numbers that the number of cases was doubling on average every 3 days. On March 18th, we had about 9,000 cases in the U.S. On March 21st, it was 24,000. On March 24th, it was 55,000. And on March 27th, it was 100,000. If that trend had continued, we would have had over 200 million cases in the U.S. by the end of April. So with a 1% fatality rate, that would mean over 2 million Americans would die from the virus. This is what prompted the drastic measures. Now, I'm not trying to scare anybody, and I'm not making any predictions here. A lot of things could affect these numbers and cause the trend to level off. In fact, the infection rate already dropped considerably, and the total of cases is now doubling about every 4 or 5 days, due in part to the actions that we've taken. We're told that warmer weather hinders the spread of the virus, so that could definitely be a factor as well. It was 91 degrees here in Tulsa on Wednesday, which won't hurt at all. We could also have a breakthrough in treating patients, which would reduce the fatality rate. Anything could happen, and I actually expect the numbers to taper off considerably in a week or two. We'll probably end up with more like 4 or 5 million cases and no more than 50,000 dead for the year. Not nearly as bad as some were predicting, but certainly not a hoax either. All I'm saying is that if the infection rate and fatality rate were to continue along the lines that they were, these are the numbers. But epidemiology entails a lot more than basic math. You have to figure a lot of human factors into the equation as well. For example, Italy has the highest case fatality rate in the world. But Italy also has the highest median age of any populace on the planet at 45.5 years. Contrast that with the median age in the United States of 38.1. Naturally, with more old people, Italy is going to have a higher case fatality rate. But Italy has another issue, and that is smoking. They're in the top 25% in the world for cigarette consumption per capita. So an older population with a lot of smokers is naturally going to have a hard time with a respiratory virus. Then there's the problem of defining a coronavirus death. Not everybody who dies with the virus dies from the virus. But the truth is, there are very lax guidelines for listing the official cause of death. Let's watch this clip from Dr. Annie Bukacek in Montana.
Few people know how much individual power and leeway is given to the physician, coroner, or medical examiner signing the death certificate. How do I know this? I've been filling out death certificates for over 30 years. More often than we want to admit, we don't know with certainty the cause of death when we fill out death certificates. That is just life. We are doctors, not God. Autopsies are rarely performed, and even when an autopsy is done, the actual cause of death is not always clear. Physicians make their best guesstimate and fill out the form, Then that listed cause of death, whatever we list, is entered into a vital records data bank to use for statistical analysis, which then gives out inaccurate numbers, as you can imagine. Those inaccurate numbers then become accepted as factual information, even though much of it is false. So, even before we heard of COVID-19, death certificates were based on assumptions and educated guesses that go unquestioned. When it comes to COVID-19, there is the additional data skewer that is, get this, there is no universal definition of COVID-19 death. The Center for Disease Control, updated from yesterday, April 4th, still states that mortality, quote-unquote, data includes both confirmed and presumptive positive cases of COVID-19. That's from their website. Translation, the CDC counts both true COVID-19 cases and speculative guesses of COVID-19 the same. They call it death by COVID-19. They automatically overestimate the real death numbers by their own admission. Stephen Schwartz, National Director of the Division of Vital Statistics, says in answer to the question as stated in the organization's COVID-19 alert, quote, should COVID-19 be reported on the death certificate only with a confirmed test? Check out his answer, and I quote from this memo of which I have a copy, quote, COVID-19 should be reported on the death certificate for all decedents where the disease caused or is assumed to have caused or contributed to death. Certifiers should include as much detail as possible based on their knowledge of the case, medical records, laboratory testing, etc. End of quote. Most people who test positive for COVID-19 have mild or no symptoms. Therefore, testing positive for COVID-19 does not mean a person is sick with it, or if the person died, that they died from it.
The intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
They don't do autopsies on every person who dies with the virus. They leave it up to the attending physician to take their best guess. So maybe the patient is in the final stages of heart disease and they contract the virus and die. The fact is, they probably would have died anyway without the virus. But the fact that they had it makes that the official cause of death, coronavirus, rather than heart disease. But when every person who tests positive for the virus has their death listed as a coronavirus death, regardless of the cause of death, that's going to throw the projection off. The projection was based on limited testing. But as more people are tested, more people are found to have been infected, which brings the case fatality rate down. And what about people who already had the virus and recovered and didn't even realize it was the coronavirus? I know a guy in Arizona who spent a few days in bed with what he thought was the flu. He didn't go to the doctor. He just rested and drank a lot of fluids, like you always do with the flu. Then he found out some of his family members tested positive for coronavirus. He already fought it off and recovered, so he wouldn't be counted among those infected. How many are there out there like him? Probably thousands. And if they were included in the denominator, that would also bring the case fatality rate down. So it looks like we shut the country down based on fear caused by inflated projections from insufficient data. And now 17 million people have lost their jobs. As Trump has said, we don't want the cure to be worse than the virus. Let's say we do lose 2 million people to the virus. Again, that's not a prediction. We have 327 million people in this country. So what kind of country are we going to leave for the other 325 million? A capitalist democracy or a socialist state? Are we going to end up handing over more of our rights to the federal government in exchange for some sense of security that will be protected in the future? Are we going to work to maintain the country that we've all grown up in, where we can come and go freely and pursue happiness and prosperity without being under the thumb of an increasingly more intrusive government? Are we going to have a growing, thriving economy where 10% unemployment is viewed as unacceptable? Or are we going to accept 10 to 20% unemployment as normal, along with a higher crime rate and cutbacks in the government services we all depend on? These are the questions we have to be asking. A lot has been made of President Trump's desire to put the nation back to work. His critics say that he's choosing money over lives. But as I said before, you eventually reach a point where you're no longer saving lives. You're just shifting the lives that you save and the lives that you lose from one sector of society to another. Here's a clip from the movie The Big Short about the 2008 financial meltdown.
You have any idea what you just did?
Come on, we just made the deal of our lifetimes. We should celebrate.
You just bet against the American economy. If we're right, people lose homes, people lose jobs, people lose retirement savings, people lose pensions. For every 1% unemployment goes up, 40,000 people die. Did you know that?
No.
Now, the figure of 40,000 is probably on the high end because the figure is said by economists to be closer to 10,000. The unemployment rate in February was 3.5%, but today it's 14.7%, an increase of 11 points. So 11 points times 10,000 people equals 110,000 people who statistically will die from this economic shutdown. The rate of suicides increases during an economic downturn. The public's health deteriorates as people lose their health insurance and don't go to the doctor. The crime rate goes up, including the homicide rate. Drug addiction and alcoholism increase, along with drug overdoses and alcohol-related accidents. All of this contributes to an increase in the mortality rate. You can't remove economics from the equation because our lives and our standard of living are intertwined. Our work and our sense of self-worth are also linked. Look up diseases of despair or deaths of despair, and you'll find that this is a real thing. It's something that the pundits don't mention, and you don't see charts on it like you do on the pandemic, but these lives are just as real and just as important. The choices that are presented to us are essentially social distancing or herd immunity. In social distancing, you basically shut down all non-essential businesses and order the public to remain a distance of 6 feet from other people in public. That way the virus won't spread. The other option is what's called herd immunity, where instead of quarantining everybody, you just quarantine those who are most vulnerable and allow everybody else to carry on as normal. Kids, who are the least vulnerable to the virus, will expose each other and build up a natural immunity as a result. Healthy adults will also eventually build up resistance. And when 75% or more of the country is immune, the virus stops spreading. In effect, herd immunity is a quick, natural immunization process where you don't have to wait around for a year or two for a vaccine. The problem with the herd immunity approach is that it would put a strain on the healthcare industry. And you're basically conceding that tens of thousands will die over a period of 1 or 2 months until the virus is stopped. And politicians don't want to look insensitive and be accused of having blood on their hands. So instead, we've gone the social distancing route. The problem with this strategy is that it's not sustainable. We can't keep the country shut down for a year or a year and a half while we're waiting for a vaccine. We'll have to start working and returning to normal within a month or two, and when we do, the virus will start spreading again, and more people will die. And then we're right back where we started, except that the economy is in a severe recession, if not a depression. So what will we have accomplished in doing that? In 1982, my mother had a stroke. She was unconscious in the hospital, and the doctor told my dad that she was throwing blood clots from her leg. They'd tried to stop the clotting, but it didn't work. So the surgeon told Dad that the only way to make sure that the clotting stopped was to amputate her leg. Dad wouldn't let him. He said that Mom once told him that she would rather die than go through life missing a limb. The doctor said he didn't think they could save her without the amputation, but Dad honored Mom's wishes, and she ended up dying. Dad had to live with the consequences of that decision for the rest of his life. Now, I would never pass judgment on him for doing what he thought was the right thing. It was a terrible decision to have to make. One way, he risks losing the love of his life, and the other way, he risks alienating her for condemning her to life with a disability. If you've ever seen the movie Sophie's Choice, you remember that Meryl Streep had to choose which of her two kids would live. If she didn't choose one or the other, they would both be killed by the Nazis. She ended up choosing to save her son, which meant that her daughter would end up in the gas chamber. Sophie's Choice has now come to be known as a decision you have to make when either choice produces horrible consequences. That's kind of what we're facing here. And I think the mature approach is to do our best to remove emotions from the discussion and decide what's best for the nation as a whole. In my opinion, there's about half the country in rural America that's relatively unaffected by the virus that we could begin bringing back to normal now. Meanwhile, people are being threatened and arrested for doing innocent things like surfing, playing t-ball in the park, or just driving for no particular reason. Prisoners are being released early, while preachers are being arrested. A month ago, I could never have imagined how insane our country would go. But here we are. Also, there's no question that the media is doing their best to fuel the fear of the public. A couple of weeks ago, a 61-year-old sound man for NBC reportedly died from coronavirus. His name was Larry Edgeworth, and most of the media reports on his death either said that he died from the virus or after testing positive for the virus. It's only after you read the story that you discover that he had other health issues, and the extent of the virus's contribution to his death isn't known. It's what we call fear porn, a scary title to a story that has less scary details buried in it. As you can see in this video clip, he was overweight. Then there's Maria Mercader from CBS, who was also reported to have died from the coronavirus. She was 54, and according to USA Today, Mercader battled cancer and related illnesses for more than 20 years and had been on medical leave for an unrelated matter since the end of February. So she was also middle-aged with other health issues. Country singer Joe Diffie, who was 61, reportedly died from complications from coronavirus. Complications suggest that he also had other health issues. As you can see, he was also overweight. And a 55-year-old Pentecostal pastor in the Tulsa area named Merle Dry reportedly died from the coronavirus. And the media reports said that he was in good health. But I've heard a conflicting report that I haven't confirmed that he had diabetes. As you can see, he was also apparently overweight. And according to the obituary, he was a member of the Cherokee Nation. Type 2 diabetes is a common health issue with the Cherokees and is the third leading cause of death. Now, I'm not trying to be insensitive about the weight issue. I need to lose a few pounds myself. I'm just providing some context to these stories that the media tends to leave out. These people didn't just die from the virus. They died because the virus attacked them while they were physically vulnerable due to other issues like age, weight, and previous bouts with cancer, diabetes, or other conditions. The fact is, people over 80 years old have a 78% chance of recovery if they get coronavirus, so long as their overall health is good. Maybe we should put more of the focus on the real killer here, unhealthy lifestyles, which contribute to 70% of all deaths. 70%! That dwarfs the death rate from coronavirus. Here's essentially what happens in these cases. People over the age of 50 have a reduced capacity in their immune systems and have a harder time fighting off the virus. A middle-aged, overweight person who comes down with the coronavirus has trouble breathing. Remember, this is a respiratory virus. Overweight people already have a tendency to get out of breath easily, but now they struggle even more from inflammation and congestion. They start coughing in an effort to clear their airways, but they can't keep up. So they get hooked up to a ventilator. But most of the people who are bad enough to require a ventilator don't survive. At least 70% die within 2 weeks because their heart starts pumping extra hard to compensate for the lack of oxygen, and they end up in cardiac arrest. Or maybe their kidneys fail, which starts a chain reaction of organ failure. This is why it's so important to keep your weight down and work on your cardio conditioning as you age. Now let's talk about some of the conspiracy theories. First, there's the theory that the U.S. government is behind the virus. This conspiracy theory comes in various flavors. One theory is that this is a part of a global elitist plot to end America's sovereignty and reduce the size of the population. This is called the Agenda 21 conspiracy theory, based on a non-binding UN resolution regarding a move towards sustainability of populations and resources. Some people include Bill Gates in this theory because he made a speech a few years ago about a coming pandemic, although the theme of his speech was clearly preparedness rather than a need for population reduction. Now, trust me, I'm no fan of Bill Gates. I worked in IT for many years, and I couldn't stand the way he ran his business. But he's not the Antichrist, and he's not out to wipe out 1 billion people with a vaccine or anything like that. Another version of the government conspiracy theory is that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats worked with the Chinese to create the virus in a laboratory as a way of getting Trump out of office. Neither of these versions has any merit. Bill Gates' goal of population reduction is focused on education and a declining global mortality rate, not killing people with vaccines. Trust me, I'll have more to say about Bill Gates in the future. And while politicians are always going to try to capitalize on tragedies, it makes no sense to conclude that Nancy Pelosi conspired with the Chinese to kill potentially millions of people around the world and throw our economy into a depression just to remove Trump from office, any more than it made sense to conclude that Trump conspired with the Russians to steal the election from Hillary. I'm not a big fan of conspiracy theories. 1 Timothy 4:7 says, "But have nothing to do with irreverent and silly myths." Conspiracy theories would qualify as silly myths. People fear what they don't understand, and conspiracy theories feed on ignorance and preconceived ideas about the nefarious agendas of people with an opposing viewpoint. Years ago, I debated 9/11 truthers about their theories that it was done by the U.S. government. I told them that I had a different conspiracy theory. That would always get their attention. They would ask, "Who do you think was behind it?" I'd say, "My theory is that there were 19 Muslim terrorists who were financed by Al-Qaeda to destroy our buildings and bring our economy down." And it almost worked. Well, of course, they quit listening at that point, but all of the evidence supported that view, and none of the evidence supported the other conspiracy theories. By the way, all you have to have in a conspiracy is 2 people conspiring to do something. It doesn't have to be a big organization. About the only major conspiracy theory that I've given any weight to is the JFK assassination. I grew up with the niece of Lee Harvey Oswald. Her dad was a salesman in my hometown. And I always had an interest in what happened. When I was a teenager, I saw the movie Executive Action, where I saw the Zapruder film for the first time showing Kennedy's head going back and to the left, which really intrigued me. The main reason I think maybe there was a second shooter is that Cyril Wecht, the legendary forensic pathologist, says that the ballistics indicate that there were 2 shooters. Cyril Wecht isn't some nutty conspiracy theorist. He's a highly respected and educated professional. So if he says there was a conspiracy, I think maybe there was a conspiracy. But other than that, I don't buy into conspiracy theories. Well, except for Jeffrey Epstein, but that one's pretty obvious. Then there's the claim that the late psychic Sylvia Browne predicted the coronavirus. In her 2008 book, End of Days, Browne said, "In around 2020, a severe pneumonia-like illness will spread throughout the globe, attacking the lungs and the bronchial tubes and resisting all known treatments. Almost more baffling than the illness itself will be the fact that it will suddenly vanish as quickly as it arrived, attack again 10 years later, and then disappear completely. Before we go any further, watch this clip from a couple of Sylvia Browne's TV appearances.
My daughter, Michelle, was 17 years old. She'll be gone 5 years, the 21st of this year. Sylvia, I don't know how she died. Please, if you can, how did she die?
She was shot. Circumstances around her death?
She just collapsed in her room.
I lost my boyfriend tragically a few years ago. They never found him. And I've had such a hard time since. Every day.
The reason why you didn't find him is because he's in water. And to find him in water, it's like the girl that's missing in Aruba. You can't find somebody.
Well, it was September 11th. There was no, he was a fireman, but...
Oops. Boy, those were awkward, huh? See, some of these psychics have familiar spirits operating from time to time, but most of them are just con artists. They know how to talk around the issue to make it look like they have some kind of psychic powers when they don't, which is what I think was going on there. Now, this prediction about a global illness around 2020 does sound impressive, but let's look at a few other things she predicted. There will be a significant vaccine against HIV/AIDS in 2005. Didn't happen. The common cold will be over by about 2009 or 2010. Wrong. By around 2010, it will be mandated that a DNA sample of every infant born in the United States is taken and recorded at the time of the baby's birth. In around 2014, a law will be passed stating that if anyone accuses another person of a felony and it can be proven that the accuser knew the accusation was false, the accuser can be made to serve the sentence the person he or she falsely accused would have served. By around 2014, pills, capsules, and even most liquid medicine will be replaced by readily accessible vaporized heat and oxygen chambers that can infuse every pore of the body with the recommended medications. By the year 2015, invasive surgery involving cutting and scalpels and stitches and scars will be virtually unheard of. Telemarketers will have long since vanished by 2015. If only. By 2017, the stigma of mental illness will be gone. The search for extraterrestrials will ultimately end in around 2018 because they begin stepping forward and identifying themselves to various international organizations and heads of state, particularly the United Nations, NATO, Scotland Yard, NASA, and a summit being held at Camp David. Personal robots able on voice command to cook, clean, serve drinks and meals, make beds, put away laundry, and feed pets will be a fixture in most upscale homes by 2015 and affordable to the general public by 2019. By the year 2020, researchers will have created a wonderful material able to perfectly duplicate the eardrum and will be routinely implanted to restore hearing to countless thousands. Now, some people will claim that the cochlear implant was the material she was talking about, but cochlear implants have been a thing since 1978, 30 years before Sylvia's prediction. In fact, when you Google my name, Rod Saunders, you'll find that the first recipient of a cochlear implant was a guy in Australia with my name way back in August of 1978. Anybody can predict something after the fact. So Sylvia doesn't have a great track record when it comes to predictions. But psychics don't have to have a good track record. It's just the law of averages at work. They just need to get it right every once in a while, and boom, they're famous. They've got powers from beyond. Now, despite all of the prophecies about the coronavirus going away or being rendered harmless, I'm going to go on record saying that it will be around for a while. We'll probably be dealing with it again next winter. As a result, we're going to change the way we do business. We'll probably stop using cash because of the potential for spreading germs. Restaurants will be mostly takeout or delivery. Concerts and sporting events will likely have to adapt, and the government will become increasingly overbearing for our own good. Unless we all come to our senses and realize that this was basically another fiasco where the government overreacted and the American people went along with it all too willingly. And finally, is COVID-19 the judgment of God? Well, yes and no. In a sense, all sickness is God's judgment because all sickness is a result of sin and the fall of man. But I wouldn't say that this is any different from any other viral outbreak that we've seen over the years, except for the potential death toll, which won't be known for some time. And I don't know that you can set any benchmark for what number constitutes God's judgment and what doesn't. But the Bible says that all sin was judged when Jesus took our place, and judgment now is meted out to those who reject Jesus. If you're a believer and have chosen to follow Jesus, then there's no judgment awaiting you. If you're not a believer yet, trust in Him today for the forgiveness of sin and eternal life. I'm sure I'll have a lot more to say about all of this in the coming weeks. In the meantime, I'm leaving a few links in the description for you. Thanks for watching, and be blessed.